The transport ship Dominion's fist shuddered as it docked with the orbital fortress of Caris Prime. In the cargo hold, among crates of stolen supplies and captured weapons, sat a woman so unremarkable that even the guards had forgotten her name. Her clothes were little more than rags, her hair matted with grime from weeks of imprisonment. Deep scars crisscrossed her hands and arms, the kind that spoke of hard labor and harder lives. "Look at this one," sneered Captain Vex, prodding her. "With his boot. Found her hiding in a grain silo on Terran 7, probably some farmer's daughter." The other soldiers laughed, their voices echoing off the metal walls. They saw what everyone saw: a broken refugee, another casualty of their supreme leader's expanding empire. But beneath the layers of dirt and despair, ancient markings traced. Delicate patterns along her collarbone symbols, so old that scholars had forgotten their meaning. These weren't tattoos or scars, but birthmarks that had been carefully hidden for 23 years. Her guardian had taught her to cover them with mud and grime, to walk with slumped shoulders, to hide the unconscious grace that marked her bloodline. Commander Thane entered the hold, his cybernetic eyes scanning the prisoners with cold efficiency. The Supreme Leader wants to see the new captures personally. He's particularly interested in anyone from the Outer Rim worlds. His gaze swept past her without interest. "Clean them up. We can't present filth to our glorious leader." As the guards herded the prisoners toward the decontamination chambers, the woman stumbled, catching herself against a support beam. For just a moment, exhaustion overwhelmed her careful disguise. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted with unconscious nobility, and those ancient symbols seemed to pulse with their own light. One old guard paused, squinting at her with confusion. Something stirred in his memory tales his grandmother had, whispered about the lost dynasty, about royal bloodlines that could be traced in the very bones of their bearers. But the moment passed, and the woman resumed her desperate shuffle, becoming invisible once more. In his throne room high above, Supreme Leader Corvain adjusted his ceremonial crown, a replica of the ancient imperial diadem he claimed by right of conquest. For 15 years, he had ruled by insisting that the old royal family was extinct, that he alone carried the mandate to rebuild their shattered empire. His entire legitimacy rested on that lie. He had no idea the truth was walking through his halls, hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained deception. The throne room of Caris Prime was a monument to stolen glory. Pillars of black marble stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, painted with scenes of conquest, while banners displaying the Supreme Leader's personal sigil hung between windows that looked out onto the void. At the room's heart sat the obsidian throne, carved from a single block of stone taken from the ruins of the old imperial palace. Supreme Leader Corvain watched from his elevated seat as the prisoners were brought before him. His advisors flanked the throne-ambitious men and women who had helped him rise to power and now basked in reflected authority. They whispered among themselves, already discussing which captives might be useful as examples, which could be ransomed, and which should simply disappear. "The Outer Rim raids were particularly successful, my lord," reported General Hax, consulting his datapad. 17 prison worlds liberated, 43 transport convoys captured, and over 2,000 enemy combatants taken. These are the most interesting specimens. The prisoners stood in a ragged line, heads bowed and wrists shackled. Most were soldiers still wearing torn uniforms, while others were civilians who had simply been in the wrong place when Corvain's forces struck. At the line's end stood the woman from the grain silo, still hunched and unremarkable, her face hidden by tangled hair. Corvain rose from his throne with practiced trauma, his ceremonial robes sweeping around him as he descended the steps. This was his favorite part, the moment when broken enemies saw the full might of his empire made manifest. He walked slowly along the line, occasionally stopping to examine a particular prisoner with the detached interest of a collector evaluating new acquisitions. "You fought for the Confederation," he said to a captured officer. "Tell me, where is Admiral Chun's main fleet?" When the officer remained silent, Corvain smiled coldly. "No matter. We'll learn everything eventually." He continued down the line, barely glancing at most prisoners. But as he approached the woman at the end, something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, despite her obvious exhaustion, or the unconscious dignity that seemed to radiate from her, even in chains. His advisors were still talking behind him, their voices a distant murmur, but his attention had focused completely on this unremarkable captive. "Look at me," he commanded. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her head. Her eyes met his deep brown, ancient beyond their years, filled with a sadness that spoke of terrible loss. For a heartbeat, Corvain saw only another broken refugee. Then the light from the throne room's crystal chandelier struck her face at just the right angle, illuminating her features and revealing the delicate bone structure that had been hidden by grime and careful posture. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Time seemed to stop in the throne room of Karis Prime. The whispered conversations of courtiers faded to nothing. The distant hum of the station's life support systems fell silent, and even the ever-present rumble of passing ships disappeared. In that crystalline moment, Supreme Leader Corvain stared into the face of the woman he had spent 15 years claiming was dead. The bone structure was unmistakable. The high cheekbones that graced 1,000 ancient portraits, the distinctive shape of her eyes that marked the Altarian royal bloodline, the way her jawline traced the same elegant curve as the ceremonial masks in the old imperial archives. But it was more than mere genetics. There was something in her bearing, even shackled and disguised, that spoke of centuries of noble breeding. Corvain's hand trembled as he reached toward her face, then stopped inches away. His advisors were watching now, confused by their leader's sudden paralysis. General Hack stepped forward with concern, but Corvain barely heard his words. All his attention was focused on the impossible figure before him. "It cannot be," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The archives... the DNA scans. We confirmed every death... The woman, no." The Empress met his gaze with steady dignity. She had seen the recognition dawn in his eyes, watched as 15 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled in an instant. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried the cultured accent of the old imperial court, refined by suffering into something harder and more genuine than mere breeding could provide. "Hello, Corvain," she said quietly. "You've grown since I last saw you. Still playing with crowns that don't belong to you, I see." The throne room erupted in confused murmurs. Guards raised their weapons uncertainly, unsure whether to treat this apparent insult as grounds for immediate execution. But Corvain held up a shaking hand, his eyes never leaving her face. She was Princess Lirelei Altarian, heir to the Galactic Empire, daughter of Emperor Marcus III, and the rightful ruler of 200 worlds. The woman whose death Corvain had announced to the galaxy, whose funeral he had attended as a grieving subject, whose empty tomb had become a shrine to the old order's destruction. The legitimacy of his entire reign depended on her being dead, and she was standing in his throne room, very much alive. "My lord?" General Hax ventured, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Should we execute the prisoner for her insolence?" Corvain barely heard him. Memories flooded back, serving as a young lieutenant in her father's guard, watching her grow from a spirited child into a woman of remarkable intelligence and strength. He remembered the day the rebellion began, the chaos as loyalists tried to evacuate the royal family, the explosion that was supposed to have killed her along with her parents, but someone had saved her. Someone had hidden her away while Corvain built his empire on the foundation of her supposed death. Asterisk, asterisk. In the suffocating silence of the throne room, Supreme Leader Corvain faced the impossible choice that would define not just his reign, but his very soul. The woman standing before him, Princess Lirelei, the rightful empress, watched him with eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed facade to the conflicted man beneath. His advisors pressed closer, sensing something momentous in their leader's stillness. General Hax's face was a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "My lord, you know this prisoner? She claims familiarity with you, but surely leave us." Corvain commanded, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. When his advisors hesitated, he turned toward them with such fierce intensity that several stepped backward. "All of you, clear the throne room, now." But Supreme Leader, Hax began, "Now." The word echoed off the marble walls with final authority. Guards and courtiers alike scrambled for the exits, their footsteps fading into the distance. Soon, only Corvain and Lirelei remained, facing each other across 15 years of lies and the width of an empire built on her supposed grave. Corvain moved to the controls by his throne, sealing the chamber and activating privacy screens that would prevent any surveillance. Only then did he approach her again, this time without the performance of supreme authority. His shoulders sagged slightly, revealing glimpses of the young lieutenant who had once sworn to protect her family. "They told me you were dead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The explosion in the palace. We found bodies, DNA evidence. I mourned you, Lyra. I mourned your whole family." "Decoys," she replied simply. "My mother's security chief had prepared for this possibility. False identities, body doubles, escape routes. I was already off-world when the palace fell." Her chains clinked softly as she shifted. "I've been hiding ever since, watching you tear apart everything my family built." The accusation hung between them like a drawn sword. Corvain had indeed reshaped the empire, consolidating power through force where her father had ruled through consensus, replacing the old noble houses with his own hand-picked governors, transforming a confederation of allied worlds into a military dictatorship. "I had to," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. The empire was fracturing. Without strong leadership, it would have collapsed into civil war. Millions would have died. "So instead you started dozens of wars yourself," she countered. "How many millions have died for your strong leadership, Corvain?" He flinched at the use of his given name. She was the only person left alive who had known him before his transformation into the Supreme Leader. "You down awards don't understand the burden of rule. The choices a leader must make. I understand perfectly." Her voice hardened. "I've spent 15 years among the people you govern, seeing how they live under your regime. I've seen the prison worlds, the forced labor camps, the families torn apart by your conscription drives. This isn't leadership, Corvain. This is tyranny dressed in my family's stolen symbols." The truth of her words struck him like physical blows, but what hurt most was the disappointment in her eyes. In the sealed throne room, with the weight of an empire pressing down upon them both, Supreme Leader Corvain knelt before the woman, whose existence threatened everything he had built. The obsidian throne loomed behind him like a monument to his hubris, while Princess Lirelei stood before him in chains that seemed almost absurd given the power dynamics that had just shifted between them. "I never wanted the crown," he said, his voice breaking with 15 years of suppressed guilt. "When they told me you were dead, when the empire began to fracture, I took power to hold it together. I told myself it was temporary, that I was keeping your throne warm until someone more worthy could claim it." Lirelei studied his face, seeing past the Supreme Leader's mask to the young man who had once carried her books and laughed at her jokes. "But power is seductive, isn't it? Each day you wore the crown, it became a little more yours. Each choice you made in my name became easier to justify. Yes, he whispered. It was the first completely honest word he had spoken in over a decade. She stepped closer, her chains rattling softly. Do you know what the hardest part was? Not the hiding, not the constant fear of discovery. It was watching you become everything my father feared most in a ruler. He spoke of you often, you know. Called you the most promising officer in the Imperial Guard. He was planning to recommend you for the Order of the Golden Phoenix. Corvain's shoulders shook. The Order of the Golden Phoenix, the highest honor the Empire could bestow, reserved for those who embodied the noblest ideals of service and sacrifice. The irony was devastating. I can give it all back, he said suddenly, looking up at her with desperate hope. The throne, the crown, the entire empire. I can announce your return, restore the legitimate succession. The people will celebrate. And what of your followers? Your generals? The entire power structure you've built? Liralay's voice was gentle, but implacable. They won't simply accept my return. It would mean civil war, Corvain. Exactly what you claim to prevent. He saw the truth of it immediately. Men like General Hax had invested too much in the current regime to simply step aside. The revelation of his lies would destroy not just his authority, but the stability of the entire empire. Millions would die in the chaos that followed. Then, what would you have me do? He asked, his voice hollow with despair. Liralai looked around the throne room, at the banners bearing his stolen symbols, at the crown that sat on a pedestal beside the throne. When she spoke, her words carried the wisdom of someone who had learned leadership through suffering rather than ambition. Rule better, she said simply. You say you took this crown to serve the people? Then serve them. Reform the laws, end the forced conscription, close the prison worlds. Be the leader my father thought you could become. And you? She smiled for the first time since her capture, and for a moment she looked like the girl he remembered from the palace corridors. I'll be what I've always been, a guardian of my people. Whether that's from a throne or from the shadows doesn't matter. What matters is that they're protected. Corvain rose slowly, understanding flooding through him. She was offering him redemption, but at a price. He would have to earn the crown he had worn for 15 years, prove himself worthy of the trust she was placing in him. With trembling hands, he reached for the key to her shackles. As the chains fell away, Princess Liralay rubbed her wrists and looked at him with something that might, someday, become forgiveness. The galaxy would never know that their supreme leader had knelt before his rightful empress. But from that day forward, they would feel the difference in how he ruled with wisdom instead of force, with mercy instead of fear, and with the knowledge that true power comes not from the crown you wear, but from the trust others place in your hands. Outside the throne room, the empire continued its course among the stars, unaware that everything had changed in the space of a conversation between two people who had found their way back to who they were meant to be. Asterisk.